Morning children. Now respiratory system in humans. Now humans have well developed respiratory system which is responsible for the exchange of gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen. And the lungs are the main respiratory organs. So the path through which the air travels and reaches the lungs and back to the atmosphere is called respiratory tract. Now this respiratory tract consists of many different parts, okay, and those parts are number one, nose and nasal cavity, then pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs and alveoli. These are the different parts which makes the respiratory tract. Now the first one, nose and nasal cavity. So when we breathe air, the air we breathe through our nose and the air enters the nasal cavity. Now the nasal cavity is lined with fine hair-like structures. So when we breathe in air, that air is not clean. It contains many impurities like germs, dust particles which are harmful for our body. So when the air enters the nasal cavity, the fine hair which are present in the nasal cavity will trap all those dust particles before they enter our body to reach the lungs. And this nasal cavity also has a sticky substance called mucus. So these mucus also trap all the germs before they enter our body to reach the lungs. Then the next part is the pharynx. Now pharynx, it is the point where the food cross each other, food and air cross each other. So this pharynx is divided into three parts: upper pharynx, middle pharynx and lower pharynx. Only food passes through the upper pharynx and both air and food passes through the middle pharynx and only air passes through the lower pharynx. So when the air passes from the lower pharynx to the next part, larynx, which is also called a voice box. So these larynx, when the air enters this part, larynx, the larynx vibrates due to the presence of the air. So when the larynx vibrate, then it will produce the sound. Then the next part, from the larynx, the air passes to the trachea. Trachea, it is a tube-like structure which is also called the windpipe. And this trachea is divided into two parts and they are called bronchi. Okay, then these bronchi, it is the plural form. The singular of bronchi is bronchus. Now since we have a pair of lungs, means two lungs, one on the left and the other on the right side. Okay, so each bronchus leads to the lungs. Alright, each bronchus leads to the lungs, and again each bronchus are subdivided into many small branches, and those small branches are called bronchioles. Then comes the lungs. Now lungs, we have a pair of lungs, means total two, one on the left side and the other on the right side. And the left lung is two-lobed and the right lung is three-lobed. Is that clear? So the lungs, like it is a spongy air-filled structure, is covered by a membrane called pleural membrane. and in between the pleural membrane there is a fluid which is a liquid, and this fluid is called pleural fluid. So, the function of the pleural fluid is this fluid keeps the lungs moist and helps in the exchange of gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, since our lungs is located in the chest, so it is protected by the rib cage, okay? And below the lungs there is a sheet of muscles called diaphragm, and this diaphragm helps in the breathing or external respiration. Now, you know what is breathing? Like it involves inhalation and exhalation, taking in air and giving out carbon dioxide. So, this diaphragm helps in external breathing, external respiration. So, how does it help? This diaphragm, it contracts continuously when we breathe in and breathe out. Then the next part is the alveoli. So, at the end of the bronchioles, there are small sacs or small bag-like structures called alveolar sacs, and these alveolar sacs contain a group of alveoli, and where the exchange of gases takes place. And these alveoli are supplied with millions of blood capillaries. So, children, these are the different parts of respiratory tract. So, if you just look at the chart out here, then you can see the different parts: nasal, cavity and nose, through which the air enters, and the hair will trap all the impurities of the air, and the air will passes to the larynx, which is also called a voice box. Then from the larynx the air passes to the trachea, a tube like structure which is divided into two branches called bronchi, and each bronchus leads to the lungs, where it is divided into many branches called bronchioles. And you can see the lungs out here. We have two lungs, one on the left and the other on the right side, and below the lungs you can see the muscular sheet called diaphragm, which helps in external respiration or breathing. Is that clear? Then in between the two membranes of the lungs you can see the pleural cavity which will cover the lungs, and they have fluid called pleural membrane which will keep the lungs moist for the easy exchange of gases. So, these are the different parts of respiratory tract. Now, exchange of gases. Now, how does the exchange of gases takes place inside our body? Now, gas exchange is the process that occurs between carbon dioxide and oxygen. So, the inhaled air, the air that we breathe in after passing through the trachea, bronchi and bronchioles reaches the alveoli, where the exchange of gases takes place. Now, the air that we breathe in is rich in oxygen, okay, and this alveoli is supplied with millions of blood capillaries which contains blood, and the blood which is in the alveoli has less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. So, the air that we breathe in, which is rich in oxygen, once they will diffuse through the walls of the capillary into the blood and combines with hemoglobin in red blood cells. Now, what is hemoglobin? Hemoglobin, it is the protein molecule, okay, which are present in the red blood cells. And if you see the function of hemoglobin, then the hemoglobin will carry oxygen from the lungs to each cells of our body, and again it will return carbon dioxide back to the lungs. So, when the air that we inhaled combines with hemoglobin, then that blood is called oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin means the blood rich in air, and this blood is also called oxygenated blood, and this blood will be carried to each cells of our body from the lungs, and once each cells of our body receive the blood or receive oxygen, then the internal respiration takes place, which is also called cellular respiration, the second stage of respiration. So, what happens in internal respiration? The food is oxidized, or the food will combine with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water and energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate. And in this process, carbon dioxide and water are released as byproducts. Now, since we don't need carbon dioxide, right, it has to be removed from our body. So, that carbon dioxide is again combined with hemoglobin, and when that carbon dioxide combines with hemoglobin, then it is called carbaminohemoglobin, which is also called deoxygenated blood, the blood rich in carbon dioxide. So, that deoxygenated blood or carbaminohemoglobin will leave the cell and reaches the alveoli, from where that air, carbon dioxide rich air, is rushes out through our nose. So, this is how the exchange of gases takes place in human body. Now, mechanism of breathing. Now, you know what is breathing? It is the external respiration, the process which involves inhalation and exhalation. We are taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. So, we are going to discuss that mechanism of breathing. What happens when we inhale air? What happens when we exhale air? That we are going to discuss, which is called mechanism of breathing. Now, the first one is inhalation, the process of taking in air. So, you see, when we inhale air, when we breathe in air, then that what happens? The rib cage, since the lungs, it is located in the chest. So, when we inhale air, our ribs will move upwards and outwards, due to the contraction of the muscles. Then, when the ribs moves upward and outward, then the diaphragm, which is the muscular sheath which is below the lungs, this diaphragm will become flat and it will move downwards due to the contraction of muscles. Okay. So, when the rib cage moves upward and outward, when the diaphragm becomes flat and when it moves downwards, what happens at that time to the rib cage? The volume inside the rib cage will increase, okay, and the air pressure inside the ribs will decrease. So, once the pressure of the air decreases, what happened? As a result, the air will enter our lungs. That is inhalation. So, in inhalation, it takes place due to the contraction of the muscles of the ribs and the muscles of the diaphragm. Then the next mechanism of breathing is exhalation. What happens when we breathe out? Now, what happens when we breathe out? Our ribs will move downward and inward, and due to the relaxation of the muscles, and the diaphragm will move upward again due to the relaxation of muscles. So what happens when the ribs moves downward and inward and the diaphragm moves upward? The volume of the rib cage will decrease and the air pressure inside it will increase, and as a result the carbon dioxide will be given out through our nose. That is exhalation. So in exhalation it takes place, or in exhalation relaxation of muscles takes place. So that is the mechanism of breathing. Is that clear? So now children, I just want to discuss some questions regarding till where I have explained. Alright. So the first one is like, what are the products of respiration? Products of respiration, what happens when the internal respiration takes place? What are the things that will be released? Then they are, the products of respiration are carbon dioxide, water and the energy in the form of ATP, right? Then the next question, in which respiration glucose is oxidized to produce ethyl alcohol? Now you have already learned there are two types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic respiration takes place in presence of oxygen, anaerobic respiration takes place in absence of oxygen. So when the food is oxidized in absence of oxygen, which is anaerobic respiration, then the product released are ethyl alcohol or lactic acid. So the question, in which respiration glucose is oxidized to produce ethyl alcohol? It is anaerobic respiration. Now the trachea divides into two branches. What are these branches called? This trachea, which is a tube-like structure, divided into two branches, and those two branches are called bronchi. Okay. Then what is the name of the muscular sheath below the lungs? Now below the lungs, what do you call this sheath, muscular sheath? It is called diaphragm, right? And what is the full form of ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. Then next question, what is the function of pleural fluid? Now the pleural fluid will moist the lungs, keep the lungs moist for diffusion of gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen. And which organ is called the voice box? Voice box, that is larynx. Okay. Then which membrane covers the lungs? The lungs are covered by membrane, and that membrane is called pleural membrane, right? Then where does the exchange of gases takes place? Exchange of gases takes place in alveoli. All right. Then the last question, what is formed when oxygen combines with hemoglobin? Then what is formed? Oxygenated blood, which is called oxyhemoglobin. All right, children. So till here, today I am going to do till here. So in the next class we will discuss some common respiratory diseases. Okay. Thank you, children.